tell us about your first job, your jobs that you had to earn money.
Oh, when I was 15 years old, my Uncle Walt Maynard worked for the DNRGW Railroad. His job was looking after the signal devices along the railroad and daily making sure that they were operable and in good condition. It was a maintenance job, and he was an expert electrician and took care of that responsibility for the railroad. That summer that I was 15 years old, the railroad was building up the railroad grade underneath the ties, and they were using ground up slag from the steel mill in Provo or Springville, and slag was ground to a gravel size, loaded in railroad cars, and then brought down to the area where they were working, and they opened the bottom of the loaded cars and let the slag pour out between the rails on the train. Then it was our job as the workers to shovel the slag underneath the ties and raise up. And there was a crew of Mexican workers that jacked up the rails and the ties to a certain height, and then we with the shovels would have to go along and fill in underneath the ties up to that point, and then they would adjust the height of the rails according to their specifications, and that was done by the straw boss, a man by the name of Manello. And that was a horrific job. Every time you thrust the shovel in to get a load of slag, it would about jar your arms and legs because it was so hard. The rock was a lot harder than regular gravel, and it wouldn't move. You'd thrust the shovel in and it'd just shake you. But we managed to get it and get the job done and put in a good day's work each day. So I worked with that all most of the summer, and then my uncle, who maintained the signal switches, needed a helper, and he took me with him on his little railroad trolley car, and we headed for the hot desert east of Price to an area known as Mounds, M-O-U-N-D-S. where he was working. And he was driving copper ground rods into each signal box, near each signal box, and then connecting them up with the electricity to the rails and so forth. I don't know what all he just did, but it was a real hot job working in 110-degree heat and wielding a 12-pound sledgehammer to drive those rods. And it was that hot in the shade and there was no shade.
Wow.
So I spent the rest of the summer working with Uncle Walt on installing those ground rods.
Now you were 16 at the time?
15, yeah.
15.
Yep.
So,
I ran across a couple of my old pay slips from that employment while looking through a lot of my memorabilia stuff, and signed by the railroad president in Denver. I remembered back some real pleasant times, even though the heat was brutal and all the workers were Mexicans that I couldn't understand because they couldn't speak English. But anyway, I got the job done that summer, and by the time school opened up, I was ready to go back and have a different experience.
what was the next job you got? When you were 16, you got so you had a paper route?
Oh, I had a paper route, yeah. I delivered the Salt Lake Telegram. It was an evening newspaper, and the fellow that brought the papers from Salt Lake was named Slim Wyckoff. He was a tall, slim fellow and drove a Ford panel truck, and he made the trip from Salt Lake to Price every day, bringing the fast freight, which was the newspapers, movie, film for the theaters in Price, and various other stuff that needed fast transportation. Anyway, he would make the trip from Salt Lake to Price every single day and bringing the newspapers. And then I'd take my bundle of newspapers and deliver them to my customers. So it was a good job. While working there, the men that owned the freight lines hired myself and another paper boy to meet the truck each day, not Wyckoff's truck, but their truck that was loaded with produce. Always having some perishable material like fresh meat, and it would come in a full carcass, except the cows would be quartered. So you'd have to carry the quartered hunk of beef into the cooler and hang it up. The beef would weigh well over 100 pounds, maybe 125 or up. Heavy enough that I couldn't carry it alone. So it'd take two of us to carry that quarter of beef in their cooler and hang it up on a hook. So anyway, they hired us to do that, and then when we got through with that little job, by then the papers were in and we'd go on our paper route. Well, that proved to be a real fine job. It kept me busy from about 4 o'clock in the afternoon till about 6 o'clock at night to do that and deliver my newspapers. So it kept me in good, employed and in good money all during my 15, 16, 17 years, and they paid us to do that. It was only a couple hours work, and they paid us $5 for that 2 hours. So that was a good bit of money. And after working there for about a year, I went to Mr. Karras, and he was one of the Greeks that employed us. And everybody always said, never work for the Greeks because you'll always get it in the end. Don't know what they meant by that, but I assume that they'd chip you out of pay some way. But anyway, I went to Mr. Karras, and he was a real nice fellow. And I asked him for a raise. Oh, you want a raise, do you? You've only been here a little while. And gave me a big song and dance about that. But when we got the next paycheck, it was $7.50 a week instead of $5. It was a very generous raise for what we were doing. And then when Christmas season would come along, they'd always get fresh fruit like oranges and grapefruit and stuff like that, that we always, the other fellow and I, always were invited to share with that produce, and sometimes I'd bring a dozen grapefruit home for the family and stuff like that. So it was a real good job and kept me in pretty good money.